You're listening to What's on Your Bookshelf with your hosts, Denise Russo and Scott Miller.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf. This is a life and leadership podcast where we are exploring the lessons we're learning through the books on our shelves. My name is Denise Russo. I'm here today with my co-host, who's actually our producer, Scott Miller, and I'm so thrilled that he is joining me today. Our guest today is a Basketball Hall of Famer, co-founder of the NBA's Orlando Magic, and former general manager of the Philadelphia 76ers. He was named one of the 50 most influential people in NBA history. In 2012, he received the John W. Bunn Lifetime Achievement Award from the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. He's a top motivational speaker and author of over 100 books, many of which are on our bookshelf. He's not only an athlete and a successful businessman and a pillar in the Orlando community, he's an accomplished author and speaker, but he's also a husband, father, and friend. Today, we are talking about his book, Coach Wooden. We are thrilled to introduce you today to Mr. Pat Williams. Pat, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to our chat. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, Scott, why don't you get us started here today?
Pat, we just finished your book, Coach Wooden, and Tommy Lasorda said this about Coach Wooden. John Wooden not only taught his players about basketball, he taught them how to live and appreciate life. I respect John Wooden as a great coach and, more importantly, a great man. Pat, can you tell us about the time you first met John and your first impressions of him and how he impacted your life?
An abundance of great advice, an abundance of counseling skills. There just was something different about him. So long after his retirement, I contacted him because I wanted to write a book called How to Be Like Coach Wooden. And he gave me his approval. And that led to 3 other books that I've written about Coach Wooden. He let me into his life. At that point, he was well on into his 80s. He lived till 99, and I was able to spend many an evening with him, had a number of dinners with him, and it was always an absolute treat to be with this man who had this rare quality called wisdom. And I was able to track down just about everybody who knew him. All the way back to his roots in Indiana, I was able to track down everybody I could find who had never played for him or coached with him or coached against him, and that helped to make this book really come alive.
What an incredible opportunity. Pat, I was so excited to get a copy of this book from you not long ago at an event that was hosted by John Maxwell, who's also a fan and mentee of Coach Wooden. And I'm curious, as you were being inspired to write this book, if there's perhaps a memory of the time that you spent with Coach, or maybe something that you weren't able to include in the several books that you've written about him that maybe you could share with our audience.
Well, it was always a delight. He lived in Encino, California, lived in a condo there that he'd been in most of his adult life, and he would make an appointment with him, and he'd come over to the condo. He'd be there on the first balcony waiting to welcome you. Then he would pick him up in the garage, where he lived, and head off to his favorite restaurant for dinner. And that was always a treat. Everybody knew him at the restaurant. Everybody would come over to the table to greet him and make themselves known to him. And he was always very gracious, always very kind. Billy Packer, the broadcaster, once said that John Wooden is the most humble, famous person you'll ever meet. And so whenever you were with him, John Wooden, who generally was considered the greatest coach in the history of sports, it was never about him. It was always about you. He never bragged. He never talked about his accomplishments. He always wanted to know about you, and he wanted to, hear what you had to say. He was a great listener. And I think that's one of the things why people were drawn to him, they would come over to that condo and sit there, which I did on numbers of occasions. And that was a treat to sit in his office, which now is a museum on the campus at UCLA. But we were able to do that on any numbers of occasions. And I look back on it now, and what a privilege that was, what a treat that was to be able to spend time with Coach Wooden right where he lived, right where he conducted his world.
What an absolute honor to be able to learn from you about him, and then just the reach beyond that for all the people that have not only read all of your books, but that have learned from him. Scott, I know you have a question for Pat about something that John has shared with thousands and thousands of people that clearly he would never have an opportunity to meet in his own lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. So this one's about the pyramid of success. So Coach Wooden was known for his pyramid of success. Can you tell us about some of the examples of some of the key elements of the pyramid and how it continues to impact people beyond the basketball court?
It took years and years for him to put this together. And it would all climax up at the top of this pyramid of success. He had them printed up nicely in color, and I think he had to give them away, and the tens of thousands people would write him and send him a note, and they would want a copy. He would always sign them to you, and that pyramid of success is probably his most long-lasting calling card. I think it's remembered as probably every bit as much as the NCAA titles that his teams won. The pyramid of success, it's a beautiful example of what it takes to be a successful person. And Coach Wooden wanted his players to be successful long after their basketball careers. All the people that he met, even if they had been strangers to him, he wanted them to be successful. And this wonderful work that he did, and it was nicely done. It was clear, it was legible, it made sense. He would sign them by the thousands. No telling how many of them are framed in people's offices or people's homes around the country and around the world.
I don't have a framed copy, but I do have a copy that's been in my office for a long time that my father gave me when I was very young for me to learn from. And when I think about your book, Pat, these are the 7 principles that shaped his life, and your title says, will change yours. And I could say with absolute certainty over the last several episodes and many, many hours that we've recorded discussing and learning deeply from your book, we've applied so many things that you've taught us through the pages of your own encounters with Coach Wooden and from your own wisdom. And the book highlights these 7 key principles. In our podcast and diving into the learnings, it was really hard for me to pick out maybe a favorite principle or a chapter. I would say that for me, though, what really strikes me the most is the chapter and the principle that Coach Wooden had in his pocket from his dad about drinking deeply from good books, especially the Bible. And, our podcast is called What's on Your Bookshelf, and it's really about diving deeply into the books that were found on my bookshelf that my friends just wanted to hear more about, and we found that together we could learn. And I'm curious if there was one principle of the 7 that maybe stands out for you above the rest.
Let me talk about 2 of them. One of those principles was make friendship a fine art. That's quite a challenge, isn't it? To befriend people and be a good friend, and then introduce your friends to other people and expand that web of friendship. And the way his dad, who was not a highly educated man, he was a farmer basically, make friendship a fine art. I love the way that's phrased. And that's a good challenge to all of us to develop good friendships, solid friendships, meaningful friendships. And then expanding that web of friendship out to other people. So that was one of the 7 that really has stuck with me. The other one is, and again, the way Mr. Wooden, the father, phrased it, drink deeply from good books. Isn't that wonderfully? Drink deeply from a good book. That means you're not just reading superficially. You're reading to really drain that book. You're reading with a pen in your hand. You're reading to mark different stories that you like. You're reading to fold down the pages of some of those special things. And then maybe later when you're finished the book, you go to a copying machine and copy out those pages that you folded down, because you want to retain some of those highlights from that book that will carry with you, and you keep it on file, and you go back later, long after the book is on your bookshelf, but you've got the highlights of the book that you can always go back to. And I think that's part of drink deeply from good books, especially the Bible. Coach Wooden was brought up in a Christian home, and then his Christian faith, was part of his life, from the time he was a small boy. And his family spent time in God's Word, and they learned the Bible, and they memorized the Bible, and they made the Bible, a big part of their life, which all of us need to do. That's God's book. It's filled with godly principles, the way God wants us to live. It's our rule book for life. It's the game plan for life. And we need to be knowledgeable about the Bible. We need to spend time in it every day.
100%, absolutely. And I'm sure we could take another podcast just to talk about the leadership lessons and wisdom that we learn from the Bible. I know, Scott, you have another question, though, about how Coach Wooden weaved together his principles on self-determination and confidence, as well as humility and character, and especially faith, family, and friends. So what about your next question, Scott?
Sure. So Coach Wooden's coaching style was really rooted in positive reinforcement and building strong character in his players. Can you give us some examples of how his coaching style impacted you and the lives of his players beyond the basketball court?
I wouldn't have his share of struggles with young Bill Walton. But to talk to Bill Walton today about Coach Wooden and what Coach Wooden meant to his life, powerful. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, back then he was Lou Alcindor. He has written a book about what Coach Wooden meant to him. This is not done. This is just unique stuff. Swen Nader, who was Bill Walton's backup center, he has devoted, countless dozens of poems that he has written about Coach Wooden. Who does that? I mean, it's unbelievable that his former players, are that devoted. There's any number of books written about him by his former players. I can't tell you any other coach where that's ever happened. So it's a beautiful story, wonderful story. And Coach Wooden just missed getting to his 100th birthday. But he died at 99, and the wonderful story, somehow he toddled out of bed in the hospital room and shaved. And he said, I'm going to heaven. And he said, I'm going to see Nell. And I want to look good to her. And he shaved himself at 99, just before he died. So he'd look good for Nell. He was a one woman man. He had one girlfriend, one wife. That was Nell, and she died before him by many years. But he only had eyes for her. Wrote her a letter every week after her death, and those letters were stacked up on her side of the bed. I had the privilege of looking into the bedroom one day and seeing that stack of letters right there. on her side of the bed. what a man, what a life, what a difference maker he was and still is. Coach Wooden's going to be making a difference in people's lives, for the next 100 years. And I'm so glad. One other quick note: Coach Wooden began to write himself books late in his life, and I'm so glad he did. Everything that I think he would want to share, from leadership to his faith journey to principles that he learned as a youngster and so forth and so forth. He ended up writing on all those topics, and all those books are out there. And I'm so glad that he did that, because it allows us to really study the man in depth.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing some of those personal experiences that you've had. I'm going to tell you what, you are going to have a very big fan in Samantha Powell, who's one of our other co-hosts, because she, as we finished the book after many, many episodes of us going through your book, she said that what she took away from it was the absolute love story. And she looked at the whole book as a love story between Coach and his wife now. And so thank you for sharing that. I think that's going to probably be her favorite part of our interview today. He's left this legacy, as you said, for thousands and thousands, if not millions of people who you don't know what those threads are that will reach from sea to shining sea and overseas and above and beyond. When you think as yourself, Pat, as a man of faith and somebody who's really an icon in the sports industry yourself from many different types of fields and courts, what would you say from your perspective is what created an opportunity for Coach Wooden to be in a position in this world where he had a tipping point that he will be remembered for many, many years to come and impacted all the lives that you've mentioned today and beyond?
Well, I think it all goes back to Coach Wooden's father. And he had a wonderful mother, and he talked about her some, but he talked and wrote and spoke repeatedly about the influence of his dad. And that's a good challenge to all of us. Dads out there, the impact you're having on your children, positively or not so positively, is powerful. And it lasts for a lifetime and beyond. So here is Coach Wooden, the greatest coach of all time, in his 90s, and he's still writing and talking about the impact his father had on him. Well, there's a powerful lesson there, dads, that, and I'm not minimizing the importance of mothers in any way, or grandparents, or coaches, or teachers, but Dad, you're the key guy here in the life of your children. You are. The things you say, the way you handle yourself, the way you speak, the lessons you impart are just a vital part for the future of our young people in this country. So, dads, follow Coach Wooden's example here. Follow the example of John Wooden's father, Joshua, and what he meant to John and the other Wooden brothers. It's so powerful, so important.
I would like to add to that we talked offline about my relationship with my dad, which is one of the most important relationships I have in my life, and how you indirectly didn't know the impact that you had on my dad. And I know the impact that as you as a dad have had on your children. And so I wouldn't diminish the impact that you continue to have with people that you don't even know, who have read your books and have watched what you're doing in our local and global community. We want to pivot a little bit here and talk about you. Is that okay?
Whatever you want to ask, go ahead.
Awesome. All right, Scott, I know you have another question up about some of the things that Pat has in his own office.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such great advice to hear as a father, too. Thank you for that, Pat. Our podcast is called What's on Your Bookshelf. So what we'd like to know is, what are you reading now? And do you have any recommendations for us and our audience?
It's a number of books that are on my shelves waiting to be read. And so I can't emphasize enough the importance of reading. the lady that cleans our house just this morning, we got to talking about reading, and she said, Mr. Williams, we need to preserve your brain. With all those thoughts swirling around in your brain from reading, we need to save your brain when you die. I laughed with her, but you see, our brain is this magnificent computer, and it needs to be fed, it needs to be challenged, it needs to be exercised every day. And the best way I have learned to exercise that cranial muscle is to attach a book to it. Good books, stimulating books. People ask me all the time, well, what should I read, Mr. Williams? And I say, well, read, what are you interested in? That's where you should be reading. Never pick up a book that you're not interested in. Now, this has nothing to do with kids in school, please. But you should read books that you're interested in. Then people will say to me, well, what do you read? And I say, well, I read baseball history, and I read basketball, and I read football, and I read presidential biographies, and I read the Revolutionary War and the Civil War period and World War II. And I read books on success, and I read books about leadership, and I read books that you would call Christian inspiration. Those are the areas that I'm interested in. I don't read about French cooking. I do not read about ancient history. I do not read about growing great roses. I don't read fiction. I read in areas that I'm interested in. And so I challenge people, if you'll read an hour a day, at the end of 1 week, you'll have finished a book. And I tell people that's a big deal, because the average man, upon finishing high school, won't read another book the rest of his life. But if you'll read an hour a day, at the end of 1 week, you'll have finished a book you set up for a year. And that's 52 books that you would have read that you're interested in. And if you'll read the right 5 books on any one subject, you'll be considered a world-leading authority on that topic. Which means at the end of 1 year, if you want to be, you could be a world-leading authority on 10 different topics. Keep it up for 10 years, you could be a world-leading authority on 50 different topics. If you're interested in reading, is life-changing. Reading makes you the most requested lunchtime companion in your city, because people, they just can't get enough. You've got all this stuff pouring out of your brain as a result of reading. And so those are my favorite people. Non-readers are kind of boring, but you get around readers. Oh my goodness, they're stimulating. That's like drinking a cup of hot coffee. Boy, they get you going.
Oh, we think so too. And we want to make sure and recommend that people pick up Coach Wooden, The 7 Principles That Changed His Life, or that shaped his life and will change yours. Your book has been so helpful to so many of our listeners, and I wish I could just get a glimpse of your bookshelf, because I bet there are so many on the shelf that we would all really love to read. But it goes back again to that principle you were talking about, Pat, that it's one thing to read a book, but it's another thing to drink deeply from it and to live out loud the things you've learned from the book. And I can tell you on behalf of our team, we have just learned so much from this book that you gifted to the world.
Well, listen, I'm so glad that you called me, and I'm glad that we had a great chance to visit. If any of you get to Orlando, go to First Baptist Church Orlando. That's where we go. And that's where the Pat Williams Leadership Library is housed. And all the books that I've saved, written, collected over 75 years, they're there. There are over 30,000 of them. all listed by category. And so if you'd like to tour through that library, it's at First Baptist Church, Orlando, and I'm sure they'd love to host you.
That sounds amazing. You mentioned Orlando, so is it okay for you to give us any sneak peeks on some amazing thing that I, as an Orlando resident, am also so excited to hope to have come to our city that you are behind? Would you be willing to share a little bit about that?
Well, for the last 4 years, we have been working hard. We're trying to bring Major League Baseball to Orlando. We feel that we're ready. We're the largest media market in North America that doesn't have a Major League Ball club, and we think our time has come. So we're working hard on trying to get the funding for a stadium. We're working hard trying to find the best way to get a team, either move one or through expansion. And we feel that Orlando is ready to be a great, great Major League Baseball city. So that's the area right now that has to be consumed, and we're hoping in the years ahead to get that project done successfully.
I cannot wait for it. And I wish that we had all day to talk about some of the things that have gone into your construction over the years, but also your beginnings as a baseball player. But I know your time is limited. And so, Scott, I think you have one last question for Mr. Williams today.
So, Mr. Williams, will you please tell us, if you were to give us a book to cover on this podcast, what would you recommend?
On my bookshelf right now about Jackie Kennedy that have just come out in the last 6-8 months. That never ceases to amaze me. We're just so fascinated by that woman. Those are just a few quick thoughts here.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you, guys. I wish you all the best. Keep up the good work. And come visit us when you come to Orlando. We'll see you at church at First Baptist. We go to the 11:30 service. So if you get here, give us a shout.
So we can see Pat Williams live and in person. And I've been to that church many times. My kids were baptized at that church. And I would highly recommend, if you are in town, to check out not only First Baptist Church Orlando, but also Pat Williams' Legacy and Leadership Library, and hopefully get to catch him in the hallway. So Pat Williams, thank you so much for participating with us today. On behalf of my friend Scott Miller, my name is Denise Russo, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of What's on Your Bookshelf.